Hello and good morning, and thank you for joining our NetIQ webinar this morning. So I'm joined here by Chris Radband from NetIQ and John Wilkins from Bytes.
Morning everyone. NetIQ are a strategic vendor for Bytes, introduced to our portfolio to assist in combating common issues we see within our customer base. A lot of our customers are purchasing Office 365 licenses, but when it comes to implementation can struggle with the requirements around Microsoft ADFS and Directory Sync. This can lead to considerable consulting effort being required. With their cloud access solution, NetIQ eliminates the need for ADFS and Directory Sync in Office 365 deployments, therefore speeding up the deployment process and increasing time to value. So if you have any more queries about how this can help you, please contact your Bytes account manager after the webinar. I'll hand you over to Chris.
I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Chris Radband. I'm a solutions consultant for NetIQ. I've been in the Active Directory and Exchange market for around 10 years as a domain admin, delivering professional services and pre-sales across both the identity and security market. So NetIQ and their technologies have been around AD management and identity management for over 15 years. They've got a strong pedigree, mature solutions, and well recognised and recommended by the analysts. This is primarily why Bytes look to introduce us to help customers with Office 365 implementations and the ongoing management. So in the next half an hour, we'll look at the challenges around SaaS implementations, so software as a service implementations, but specifically around Office 365, and how these challenges can be overcome, and making the solution secure but very efficient and straightforward to use both as an administrator and as an end user. So first of all, as I say, we'll take a look at those challenges around SaaS and the Office 365 piece, and then we'll begin to look at possible solutions around 5 key areas. Generally, one of the biggest challenges that we see is for customers being able to meet the prerequisites of Office 365. So we'll look at those, what the challenges are, and how we can help with those. We'll then move on through the further 4 steps, so how we can look at simplifying user management through the entire life cycle of the user, and how that can be integrated with Active Directory to make life easier for the administrators so they're comfortable with software and tools that they already use and already know, so the challenges of moving into the new and unknown are less of a concern. And then part of that as well, the simplification of license management within Office 365 with the dozen or so different license levels, how you can manage those to ensure that the right users have the right licenses, both to ensure that they can do the job they need to do, but also to ensure that as an organisation you're not spending on unnecessary licenses which have functionality that isn't required. And then finally we'll touch on the single sign-on functionality, illustrating how having sign-on to a single SaaS app is one thing, but then if you find yourself using half a dozen SaaS applications all through the same portal, for example, single sign-on to that portal and then pass through to all the other SaaS applications makes it quicker and easier once again for the user. Also, once again, it allows you to manage it as an administrator in a much more straightforward fashion. Finally, we'll take a quick look under the covers at how it's doing it, just to illustrate how simple it is to configure the solution as well as to deliver it to the end user. But before we begin, I just want to take a quick look at who's on the call today. So we've got quite a lot of registrations, and they're from all sorts of roles and industries, generally because email, Office 365 and SaaS in general and its implementation, and in particular the management and challenges that exist around that, are applicable to all industries, and generally the challenges that we see are common across all sectors. So whether you're a technical person, a management person or a business owner, generally we see very similar challenges across the board. So let's begin just looking at a few questions that may be on your mind, that are commonly on the mind of customers when they're contemplating moving into an Office 365 environment. So there's two that I'd like to focus on really. One of those primarily is talking about enterprise passwords and whether you want to synchronize those to the cloud. So in reality, the prerequisite for Office 365 is that those user identities and in fact the passwords for those user identities are synchronized to the cloud. Now, do you want to do that? It is a question that you have to ask yourselves, but it's a very, very common concern, and it's one that we can certainly help you with. So what people are generally looking for is to take or to maintain that authentication in-house. So that's a big security concern that people tend to have. Bear in mind, that's something that can be worked around. It also takes away some of the prerequisite challenges that you may have around implementing that synchronization of the users and their passwords, and in fact the enterprise detail into the cloud. The second big challenge that we see, especially in SME type customers, but also in larger enterprises where the requirements become more complex, are generally around the implementation of the technology. Now that's prerequisites, and there are definitely challenges around the prerequisites for Office 365, but it's also things like how do you manage the implementation moving forwards. So once those prerequisites are met or avoided using third-party technology, once they're met, how do you manage that? Do you constantly use a web console to access Office 365 and change licenses, create users, all of that challenge? And that becomes quite difficult, time-consuming, and it's certainly inefficient. So something that we'll look at is we'll look at turning those synchronizations, if you like, of your current users from the cloud. We'll look at turning those into integrated Active Directory group membership, for example. So technology that the administrators are used to, they'll be able to, as I say, manage Office 365 as simply as using Active Directory group membership. So I always find that beginning with the problem allows you to highlight the challenges in particular and then move on to the solutions. It makes it more straightforward. So we've looked at some of the challenges, and let's try and draw a picture. They often speak 1,000 words, and this is often a discussion that I'll have with customers whereby they'll almost draw this for me and tell me these are the concerns that we've got. So IT departments end up finding themselves with manual processes. So that's the process I was talking about, perhaps going on to an administration website run by Microsoft, and then having to manually generate those processes, those users, and manage the accounts. And then through there, we touched on it already, things like corporate credentials going into the cloud, things like single sign-on or strong authentication even not being an option. So whether you like it or not, those passwords are going to the cloud, and if you want multi-factor authentication, for example, that's another challenge that you're going to find. And also, once it's in the cloud, reporting is either non-existent or very minimal. So looking at this slide, it's very much about SaaS in general and the problems that we see. However, if we turn our minds to Office 365, it has all of these challenges. However, it also takes on a challenge around prerequisites. Now, I've talked quite a lot about the prerequisites already, but I want to highlight them because the two main prerequisites around directory synchronization and federation services are commonly recognized both by consultancy organizations, by implementation organizations, and also it's conversations that we have with customers and the challenges that they've seen trying to do things in a default, out-of-the-box fashion. They will tell us that implementing these prerequisites can commonly take 5 or more days per prerequisite. Now, if we consider in reality that's 5 to 10 days per prerequisite, and consider that doubled because of the two prerequisites, that can often become a financial or overhead from a time point of view. It becomes a real challenge for actually implementing the software. It can make it very painful indeed. And what we've seen in the past is that the licenses at the end of the day have barely been used or have become shelfware because that implementation is just too troublesome. On top of that, things like directory synchronization, it's a tool designed to sync directories. It's not necessarily an optimal piece of software for something like Office 365. Challenges like we talked about with passwords and synchronization, it's synced over the internet, and then for things like single sign-on challenges as well, all about implementing ADFS. So once again, those federation services, prerequisite, it's all about time, money and expertise. Further, if you want to look at doing things like multiple forests, you'd end up having to have multiple Office 365 implementations, various challenges like that. So those prerequisites aren't necessarily as straightforward as they sound. So what I would propose to you, bearing in mind both the challenges of SaaS in general and the challenges of Office 365, is a third-party solution offered by NetIQ and available through Bytes. So we've looked at the common challenges, and what we can do is we can change those challenges that we saw, all those red challenges around lack of reporting, manual processes, no single sign-on, all of those pieces. We can turn those green, and in the ideal world, help you to deliver that Office 365 in the way that the customer has, the end user, as well as the administrator side of the customer, has simple, straightforward, and efficient access to their Office 365 and potentially to other SaaS applications, Office 365 obviously, but things like Salesforce, maybe other systems such as WebEx or Box, for example. So we'll focus on Office 365, but what we can see there, for example, is an automated process. So when I say an automated process, I mean that to create a user, to generate them their Office 365 access, all they have to do is when the user is created in Active Directory or eDirectory, or even in a JDBC connection, for example, or potentially through a social channel. For example, if a user wants to access via Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, any of those accounts would allow you to have access potentially into a mailbox if that's a route you wanted to go down. So that automated process, as I say, will allow you to generate that access. So some product features, we've talked about many of them, but I just wanted to summarize them for you. So automatic provisioning and deprovisioning and user lifecycle management. So that's on top of the usual lifecycle management, license management. So it's not just single sign-on, it's also the provisioning and deprovisioning for you. Out-of-the-box connectivity, but also it's based on your existing infrastructure. So those guys, the administrators who are used to Active Directory, no change for them. And finally, a very quick point, the kind of implementation we would look at would be around something like a virtual appliance. So you can implement that very quickly internally, very little effort, and it then allows you to implement as many as you need for the benefit of fault tolerance and so on. So we've looked at some challenges, we've looked at some product features. What I'd like to do now is let's just walk through and begin to discuss those 4 or 5 key areas step by step and look at how we can make those challenges go away. So the first one that we'll look at is around prerequisites. As I say, it's often a challenge before customers even begin to look at how they'll manage their Office 365, because how are they going to implement it in the first place? So we looked at this a few slides ago, but as I mentioned, it's a reason that a significant number of Office 365 implementations fail. So directory synchronization and Active Directory federation services. So what we can do is, in the ideal world, what we'd recommend is completely removing the requirement for DIRSync and for ADFS. Not only does it reduce the implementation time, complexity, the expense, the things that cause it to become a challenge quite often, but it also ensures that your directory and the content, and importantly things like passwords, aren't synchronized into the cloud. So generally those challenges are a real big green tick once they're resolved. So what I'd like to do is show you very quickly the implementation what in effect is a prerequisite for Office 365, and we'll talk about ADFS in this example. So we talked earlier that prerequisite commonly is 5 to 10 days of consultancy or of skilled internal labour. What we do is we turn that 5 to 10 days, that potentially 10 to 15,000 pounds of consultancy, we turn that into 3 wizard-driven steps. And what you can see on the screen here is the 3 steps it required for me to implement my Office 365 Federation services. And you can see all it's asking you for there is very, very simple information. What is the public DNS name? And then what are the administrator credentials for that implementation? And with those 3 steps, that can implement ADFS for you very quickly. So you're talking minutes there rather than days, or even weeks. So that, from a security perspective and from a time and money and efficiency perspective, is potentially a significant win. We've looked at those though, so let's move on to, once you've got Office 365 implemented, let's consider what you would actually do around using it, simplifying the user management, how you would simplify the lifecycle management, both from an efficiency perspective for the user, also integrating with Active Directory so that it's straightforward for the administrators team, and then also from a license management side of things, how do we do that? It may be the case that we simply give users a default license. It may be the case that for many organisations they discover that, well, for 50% of our users this license is fine. However, for the remaining 50% of the users, either they've not got sufficient functionality or they've got more than they need. However, because of administration difficulties, everyone gets the same license and has to just struggle along or in effect waste license money by having more than they need. So what we'll do is we'll look at how you can very easily give the right users the right licenses to ensure they're empowered to do their jobs. So what you can see here is an image that I use when I'm talking about identity lifecycle. And what that's talking about is, it's illustrating something along the lines of what you would see if you're implementing, or even talking about a full identity management solution. What it illustrates, though, is the points along the user lifecycle in addition to the obvious. Now, everyone thinks about the relationship beginning. So in their mind, they have a user creation process, quite often fairly paper-based, but organisations are increasingly moving towards automated systems, whether that be full identity management systems, or more commonly in the UK, Active Directory management systems. So layering that technology over the Active Directory so you can make it more efficient and more rules and policy based to ensure security, good practice, efficiency, all of those challenges. What we look at though, once a user has been created, we then need to consider, well actually what happens through the life cycle of that user. So eventually the relationship with that user will end, and commonly that's overlooked. So when a user's mailbox or other SaaS applications remain available even once that user's disappeared. So that's obviously a security risk because they could potentially still log in, get that information, but also it's sitting there wasting a license, for example. So both the beginning and end of the relationship can be helped by automating the user flow, the user management, all through something like an automated Office 365 solution. So between that, you also have to consider that users will move around the organisation, and as I touched on, moving around the organisation will commonly mean as they change role, as they change department, as they change level within their role, their functionality requirements may change. So a user may require Excel or other certain functionality at some point in their life cycle, but not for the entire life cycle. So what that allows us to do is define at which points they have what licenses. So bear in mind that requirement through the user's entire life cycle And what we'll do now is we'll step through how simple it is to create an Office 365 functionality for a user. Now what we're going to show here is you can see you may well be used to Active Directory users and computers, or you may well be used to a management solution such as NetIQ's Directory and Resource Administrator. You can see them both there, but what you're seeing is you're looking at a standard Active Directory user. So using these tools, either during user creation or once a user exists already, if you want to give them an Office 365 capability, all you would do is add them to a specific group. Now in my illustration here, it just shows a single Active Directory group or eDirectory group, for example, which is called Office 365 users. You may have this as Salesforce.com users, you may have this for any other number of SaaS applications. You may also have a number of different Office 365 groups based upon different licenses you have. So for example, my Office 365 license here is an E2 license. If I had E3 and any other number of licenses, I could have any number of groups which are associated to those. So either manually, as we see here, or as part of an automated process upon user creation, you could have users automatically added to these groups. And all that it requires is to be a member of that group. And then you can see that at the bottom of the screen there, my account within 30 seconds to a minute of being a member of that group, my account has an Office 365 account. So pretty much in real time that account exists. They can go ahead then and they can access through a single sign-on portal, they can access that functionality. They can also potentially access any other functionality that you've given to them around SaaS applications through the solution. So that, if you like, is the headline of how straightforward and easy it is to implement a user into Office 365. What we'll do now is we'll look at, first of all, how we achieve that, and then we'll look at some of the other functionality that we can deliver through a solution. So looking at how it's achieved, it's a very simple mapping, in this case between Office 365, and you can see down there on the right hand side, you can see a number of different license types. We'll come back to that shortly to walk through what some of that information means and what the different icons mean there. But that, in this case, that specific Office 365 plan is linked to the Office 365 users group that you could see on the left hand side of the screen. So that mapping can be any number of groups to a license, and we can equally show you that very easily, which groups are mapped. So that's very straightforward, but as I say, all you need to know to automatically provision those licenses is which license plan you want. Now all of that information there is populated when it reads in through the wizard that we looked at 2 or 3 slides ago. So that information is all populated for you, and then it's a simple case of mapping across the the groups and the licenses. So it's not just a case of provisioning, as we've talked about. So yes, a user is provisioned within seconds, that's fantastic. However, for the entire life cycle to be managed properly, it's about being able to disable a user, not just delete them, because you don't know what information is there, you may well need that. So it's about disabling the user at the end of the life cycle, or if you need to secure them mid-life cycle for any reason. But also changing the user if a name changes, for example, and also the ability to manage licenses. We've talked very shortly about those licenses down the right-hand side, and I'll just step into a quick explanation now of how they work. So they're populated as part of the implementation of your Office 365 and synchronized in, so that once again is all done for you. And then that mapping is done between the groups and the licenses. So we talked earlier about the functionality side of things and changing licenses. So if you were to move from a basic user up to one that may require additional functionality of a more expensive license, all you would do is you look at the mapping, which the AD administrator guys would know. They would simply be able to move the user from perhaps an Office 365 users E2 group to an Office 365 users E3 group. Now, knowing what those different licenses offer in functionality, changing the user's group membership would automatically apply them a different Office 365 license, and that would very quickly, the user would be able to gain that extra functionality. So no need to access the Office 365 tools. All they'd be doing as the administrator, once again, is accessing tools that they're used to, flipping an AD group membership, and that will give the functionality required to the user. What you can also see on the screen is there's an approval option. So that little stamp that you can see above where it says approval is all about defining whether a user can be added to an Office 365 or license group in general automatically, or whether an approval step is required. What I would recommend, and what we tend to see, is that users will be given access to a standard group, and as they require additional permissions, in effect additional functionality and additional cost at the end of the day, those groups will begin to require approval. So you can define approval requirements very easily depending on the groups that are linked. And then on the right hand side there, if we click that top hat, what it would do is it would show me any number of AD or otherwise groups which are linked to that license type. So it would tell us, if I get added to one of these specific groups, this is which Office 365 or whatever other SaaS application license I would have given to me. So very straightforward from a management point of view. So let's move on to some of obviously what we've talked about so far is the basic functionality and the key pieces that customers and the end users require the software for. However, what we then look at is adding value on top of that around challenges that are very common now. So single sign-on, as I mentioned earlier, to multiple web applications through a single portal, but also challenges such as giving users mobile capabilities. So BYOD, for example, is incredibly popular, obviously from both the user's perspective and the organisation's point of view, given the cost savings. However, what that's going to do, inevitably, is add an element of risk because you don't know who those devices are owned by and you don't know what's on there. So what we'll do is we'll begin to look at how we can manage those and secure the information without generating any problems. So what you can see here is an example. It's a bytes example of the single sign-on portal that we would use by default. Obviously, this is all brandable. You can change it to look however you want for the organisation. But here you can see not only have you got Office 365, for example, but you've got additional functionality like Salesforce, WebEx, and Box. There's nothing to stop you having dozens of SaaS applications in here that are available from a single sign-on perspective, but also without the need for those dreaded prerequisites such as ADFS. So what you're doing there is you're adding that functionality, that ease of functionality for the end user, as well as the management from your point of view. Every time a user logs in to that portal with a single SSO session, they may see different service providers there because different changes either in their provisioning or in their access that they've been given may change. So they may see Office 365 may remain there, but they may have their license changed without even knowing it. They'd log in the same way as they're used to and get the additional functionality. If we then flip that and begin to look at how we can enable the users from a mobile perspective, but staying along the lines of the cloud and SaaS applications we've been talking about, as we've talked about, working and BYOD is increasingly commonplace, and it's things like MacBooks that organisations don't generally provide, and tablets, and these giant new phones like the iPhone 6. You can work on those devices, but generally they're not owned by the organisation. So we will allow you to take access to that, Office 365, but also, as you can see on this portal, for example, 20-odd applications there, all sorts of internal applications, but they can be published externally, but securely onto those mobile devices to help the user do their job more efficiently. So that's stepping very much beyond any Office 365 requirement, but it illustrates very well how efficient SaaS applications can help you to be. So what it's doing really is it's bringing what is commonly seen as an intranet or work that you can normally only do in the organisation. It's bringing that onto your mobile devices in the form of an app, for example, to help the efficiency of the users and the efficiency of management. So let's take a quick look just at what configuration is required to put something like this into place. And I suspect, as with most customers, you'll be pleasantly surprised at how straightforward that can be. So what you see here is the one and only piece of configuration that's required to implement Office 365, but also any other number of applications that we may like to consider. So whirlwind tour of what you would see. Top left there, you can see a number of identity sources. In reality, a lot of customers are just going to use Active Directory. They're going to allow that to have a connection into Office 365. Commonly, a number of other SaaS applications as well, because the more you add, the better value you get, and the more value the end user gets. So link those two together. So drag and drop, once again, wizard-driven configurations. And you can see as well there, at the bottom left of the screen where it says Tools, you can add additional functionality. So you can add things like Google Analytics, you can add reCAPTCHA if you wanted to with those funky little complex words to ensure that you're a user and not a robot trying to attack or denial of service, etc. You can add multi-factor authentication, so if you wanted to, you could say that to access a web application that you may have which is secure, so perhaps something like payroll, perhaps something like finance, HR, legal, anything like that, you may want to say that for certain applications, I would like the user to authenticate themselves in a further fashion than just their generic password. So, as I say, a one-time password, for example, which exists on their phone or a key fob, any of those multi-factor solutions that you may like to consider. So that's a whirlwind tour, and just at the bottom there you see a single appliance at the moment, but as it gives away on the left-hand side there, you can have a cluster, obviously for high availability, for resilience, for all those good business justifications. It will show you any number of appliances. And then just at the top of the screen before we leave this page, you can see that we're on the administration tab right now, but things like roles for approvers, things like policies for mapping between your Active Directory or eDirectory groups and your potentially any number of Office 365 licenses. And then we can move all functionality. We can look at reports and we can look at different devices that may be connected. So if we have got a mobile connected, what we can do is we can manage them all from here, as well as the user being able to manage them themselves. And that will allow you to kill devices. We've all heard about them being left on the train, and those challenges obviously present significant security risks. Yes, you might have multi-factor authentication in place. Yes, you've obviously got passwords protected and things, but as soon as the device is lost, there's a risk. So very easily, from a tab like that Devices tab, we can remove within seconds any connectivity that user's device may have to any business information. And then just an overview in seconds of what's required for a solution like this. Very simply, Active Directory, eDirectory, your existing identity store, an appliance, virtual appliance, it's about 4 gig, it fits on a memory stick, it's incredibly quick to implement. Put on a USB drive, and then another a Windows 2008 box, we call it a helper box. What it does is it allows you to do some clever stuff on top of just the directory synchronization stuff that you would get natively. So that, as I've said, has been a whirlwind tour of the functionality, the key points, but also a little look under the hood and a chat about the challenges that we commonly see. So hopefully those solutions have helped you to overcome concerns or challenges that you may be experiencing. But just from a summary point of view, the challenges of ADFS, the challenges of directory synchronization, from from an SSO and provision no longer required. So you have the security benefits of having passwords not in the cloud, also the implementation benefits financially and speed-wise, with direct synchronization. So on top of that, we're adding user provisioning and deprovisioning. We talked about the group membership act, your role-based management, and then if you want brandable patients, as you can see there on the right-hand side, all those challenges that we tend to see customers struggle with, that will help you moving forwards. So key points, not specifically from Office 365 point of view, but I want to drive home the fact that the more SaaS applications you have, the more benefit you get. So whilst we help significantly to implement Office 365 in the first place, what we can do is with those SaaS applications, integrate those as well. You still get the single sign-on, and potentially if you choose advanced authentication as well, you get the benefits of management. And as we touched on by the fact it's a virtual appliance, you get things like very quick time to value, and ease of deployment. So final piece I wanted to talk to you about is that the product we've been looking at today is called NetIQ Cloud Access, and lots of information. As you can see some of it on the screen here, very good videos for all levels of Office 365 novices through to professionals to understand the challenges in a 5-minute video. Why are the prerequisites so difficult? Why, how can they be overcome? But also things like white papers on implementation and how to make it easier. And also, if you like, analyst reports, for example, just to give you an overview of how the analysts view us and where we sit in the market. So if you wanted more information, either Bytes will be able to help you, or the NetIQ website. If you look under products, you'll find information on cloud access. So one of the questions that we've just got is around how Office 365 can work with terminal servers. I'm curious what the specifics of your question are and what the challenges might be. So what I would suggest is that the functionality of Office 365, the functionality of any of the SaaS applications that we can give to you through a solution like we just looked at, allows it to be delivered through a web console, web application. So I see no reason why you couldn't do that. However, if you want to share more details of the specific challenge that you've got, I'd be happy to discuss it offline or look at it further for you.
Okay, so I think that's all the questions we have for today's webinar. So thank you everyone for joining.